There was a morning when I simply couldn't get out of bed. The alarm kept ringing for hours, but my body felt glued to the mattress, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on every inch of me. It wasn't just exhaustion, and it wasn't a lack of motivation. It was something far deeper. I felt like there was an invisible wall separating me from everything that mattered: work, friends, even my own will to live. Nothing made sense anymore, and I wondered if it ever would again. In that moment, the silence in my home became deafening, echoing the one truth I couldn't escape. I was losing myself. And the worst part was that even though I was screaming inside, no one seemed to hear.
I'm Rachel Harper. Today, I'm sharing a story that highlights the deep struggles many face behind closed doors. This story is based on real events, but some names and details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. If this story resonates with you, please consider sharing, liking, and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Now let's get into today's story.
My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm a 38-year-old financial consultant living in Chicago.
In my professional world, I'm known as someone focused, dedicated, a hard worker who's built a solid career. But behind this polished exterior, there's always been a silent battle that few people knew about. Depression crept into my life so gradually that I barely noticed it at first. I can't pinpoint exactly when it began, but I believe it took hold during college, a particularly difficult time of transition. I remember feeling a constant sadness and an emptiness I couldn't explain. I landed a highly competitive internship, but instead of feeling excited, it felt hollow, like the victory didn't taste as sweet as I'd imagined. I was also in a relationship that seemed promising, but when it ended abruptly, it left me completely adrift. Then came the pressures of work, the need to meet expectations, and the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle. The turning point came about 4 years ago when I lost a major client. That loss triggered a spiral of self-doubt. The mounting professional pressure, combined with a lack of personal fulfillment and overwhelming mental exhaustion, dragged me into a dark place I didn't know how to escape. Depression was no longer a distant shadow. It had become a constant companion. At first, the depression was subtle. It felt like a persistent emptiness, a shadow that followed me everywhere. Simple pleasures, like walking through Chicago's bustling streets or meeting friends for dinner, became unbearable tasks. I felt drained and disconnected from the world, as though I were watching life through a foggy window. Anxiety crept in too, filling my mind with restless thoughts about the future and a vague sense that something was wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it. The impact at work was immediate. I started missing deadlines, making small mistakes that weren't like me. Focusing became a daily struggle, and even when I managed to concentrate, I was haunted by insecurity and the fear that my colleagues would notice I was slipping. I isolated myself in my office, avoiding conversations and meetings. My boss, initially understanding, suggested I take some time off. But I knew this wasn't about being tired. It was something deeper, something I couldn't control. In my personal life, things became even harder. Friends began questioning my absence from social events. When I tried to explain, they'd tell me to relax or think positive, which only added to my frustration. It wasn't about willpower. Something inside me had shifted. My family noticed I was more withdrawn. My mom, always attentive, reached out, but I shut her out too, afraid of worrying my parents. Daily routines became a challenge. Simple tasks like cooking or tidying up felt overwhelming. Self-care fell by the wayside, and I barely recognized the person staring back at me in the mirror. It felt like the Ethan everyone knew was fading away, and with each passing day, I was losing more control over my life. The darkest moments felt like being crushed under the weight of my own existence. I vividly remember one morning, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, completely paralyzed. The alarm was blaring, and I knew I had to get up for work, but the mere thought of facing the world was unbearable. It felt like an invisible weight pressed against my chest, immobilizing me. I lay there for hours, trying to summon the strength to move, but I couldn't. that was when I realized things had gotten serious. As the days went on, my isolation deepened. I started canceling plans, making up excuses to avoid seeing anyone. The texts from friends dwindled as my responses became fewer and further between. I remember forcing myself to attend a work gathering, trying to act cheerful. I mimicked the smiles and laughter around me, but inside, I felt utterly disconnected. When I got home, I was emotionally drained and vowed never to put myself through that again. At work, the days felt endless. One particularly bad day, I missed a critical deadline. My boss tried to understand, but I couldn't find the words to explain. I ended up in the office bathroom, having my first panic attack. My heart raced, cold sweat dripped down my face, and I struggled to breathe. It was terrifying. After that, I avoided anything that might trigger another episode, which only made me retreat further into myself. I didn't know how to handle the crises. Some days I told myself it was just a phase and that things would get better. Other days I blamed myself for not being able to snap out of it. It felt like there was an impenetrable wall between me and the life I wanted. Each breakdown pushed me further away from the people and things I loved, dragging me deeper into a darkness that seemed endless. I resisted asking for help for a long time. There was this voice in my head telling me I should be strong enough to handle everything on my own. The idea that depression was a weakness, or something that shouldn't affect someone independent and successful, kept me from seeking support. But after weeks of isolation and an overwhelming sense of failure, I realized that if I stayed on that path, things could get much worse. The turning point came one morning when, once again, I couldn't get out of bed for work. The exhaustion and hopelessness were so intense that I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I remember thinking, if I don't do something now, I might not be able to get out of this at all. As terrifying as that moment was, it also brought unexpected clarity. I knew I needed help, even if it meant confronting my fears and prejudices about therapy and treatment. But even with that clarity, it wasn't easy. Making that first therapy appointment took courage. I felt a mix of shame and fear. Part of me still believed I was failing by needing therapy. In the first few sessions, it was hard to open up. Speaking out loud about the emptiness and pain made everything feel more real, but at the same time, it was a relief to be heard without judgment. Gradually, I began to understand depression differently. It wasn't a flaw I had to hide, but a condition I could learn to manage. Therapy provided some relief, but during one session, my therapist suggested considering medication. The idea scared me. I was afraid of losing what little control I felt I had left. But after a few months, I realized medication could be a helpful tool, and I decided to give it a try. There was an adjustment period at first, but gradually, I noticed a slight shift in my mood and energy. The combination of therapy and medication started to bring back a sense of stability I hadn't felt in a long time. My family played a crucial role in this process. When I finally opened up to my parents and siblings about the depth of what I was going through, their response was surprisingly supportive. My brother, who I'd always seen as pragmatic and straightforward, turned out to be incredibly compassionate. He reminded me constantly that I wasn't alone and that my family's support was unconditional. That support became essential in the early steps of my recovery, helping me accept that seeking help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of courage and resilience. Over time, I developed tools to help me navigate daily life. One of the first steps was creating a routine with small, manageable goals. At one point, even getting out of bed felt impossible, so I started with tiny objectives, like taking a 10-minute walk or making my own breakfast. As simple as they were, these small acts gave me a sense of accomplishment and helped combat the inertia that depression brings. Therapy remained a vital foundation, but beyond the sessions, I learned to value self-care practices. I began meditating for a few minutes each morning, focusing on my breath and calming my mind before facing the day. Those quiet moments helped me manage anxiety and reduce the negative thoughts that often took over. Exercise also became essential. At first, lifting weights or going for a run felt daunting, but with encouragement from my therapist and support from my brother, I started small, with light walks. The sense of well-being after exercising, though subtle at first, became a motivation to keep going. I discovered that physical activity had a direct impact on my mood, gradually becoming a key part of my mental balance. Eventually, I joined a support group for people dealing with depression. I was hesitant at first. Talking about my feelings in front of others still felt intimidating. But hearing others share their struggles and victories made me feel less alone. Knowing that others were going through similar experiences brought a sense of relief and belonging. Those meetings became a safe space where I could be genuine and exchange insights in a supportive environment. I also rediscovered old hobbies that had lost their meaning. I picked up my guitar again, something that had always brought me peace, but that I'd abandoned during my darkest times. Slowly, I started playing songs that reminded me of happier moments and felt an unexpected spark of joy. Those small moments of light showed me that, despite the darkness, there were still things worth holding on to. These practices, meditation, exercise, support groups, and hobbies, helped me see depression differently. It didn't disappear, but I now had tools to face it. Each small victory, each moment of calm, changed how I viewed my depression. It became something I could coexist with, rather than something that defined me entirely. One of the most profound moments of victory for me happened on an otherwise ordinary day. I was going through a particularly rough week, where the urge to isolate myself and stay in bed felt stronger than anything else. Everything felt exhausting: work, social interactions, even the simple act of getting dressed. But that morning, something shifted. I decided almost instinctively to step outside, even if it was just for a walk around the block. I got up with difficulty, threw on the first clothes I found, and headed out. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just walked through my neighborhood, feeling the fresh air and the warmth of the sun on my face. It was a short walk, but something inside me changed. Being outside, doing something just for myself, however small, gave me a sense of accomplishment. When I returned home, I felt different. The depression hadn't magically disappeared, but in that brief moment, I reclaimed a bit of control over my life. Another moment of triumph came when I picked up my guitar again. For months, it had sat in a corner of my apartment, gathering dust. I'd look at it, but never felt the energy or desire to play. Then, one quiet Saturday afternoon, for no particular reason, I picked it up and started playing a melody I used to practice years ago. At first, my fingers felt stiff, and the notes were rough. But gradually the music began to take shape. For the first time in a long while, I felt connected to something that brought me joy. The sound of the guitar filled the silence that often haunted me, and it felt like a small but significant personal victory. These moments, as insignificant as they might seem to others, were monumental for me. Leaving the house or playing the guitar might sound trivial, but in the context of depression, they were huge. They represented progress, even if small, and more importantly, reminded me that I could still find pleasure and meaning in the things I once loved. Each tiny step forward, no matter how modest, gave me confidence that I could keep moving forward. These victories taught me that recovery isn't a straight path. There were days when I felt stuck, but even in the darkest moments, those small wins reminded me there was a way out. They became essential in rebuilding my self-esteem and hope, showing me that despite everything, I was stronger than I had realized. Today, after weathering so many crises and celebrating moments of triumph, my outlook on life and myself has changed significantly. I still struggle with depression. It doesn't simply vanish, but I've learned that it doesn't mean I'm failing. What's different now is how I approach the struggle. Instead of resisting or denying the hard days, I accept that they're part of the journey and that I have tools to handle them in healthier ways. The biggest lesson I've learned is that recovery isn't linear. There are highs and lows, days when everything feels lighter, and others when the shadow of depression returns. But over time, I've come to understand that those dark moments aren't permanent. I know from personal experience that even in the hardest phases, there's a way out, and sometimes that way out starts with a small step, like getting out of bed, texting a friend, or simply taking a deep breath and accepting that, in that moment, the best I can do is keep going. The tools I've developed, therapy, meditation, exercise, and the support of loved ones, provide the structure I need to keep moving forward. And as time goes on, I've gained confidence that no matter how dark a day may feel, I can find a way through it. These practices have given me a sense of control and shown me that I can care for myself, even when depression tries to convince me otherwise. My message to anyone facing this battle is simple: you're not alone. Depression tries to isolate us, to make us believe we're the only ones feeling this pain. But that's not true. There are millions of people going through similar struggles, and there are ways to seek help. The most important thing is not to blame yourself for the depression. It's not a sign of weakness, nor does it define who you are. Seeking support, whether through therapy, friends, family, or support groups, is an act of courage. Don't be afraid to talk about what you're feeling. You might be surprised by how supportive the people around you can be. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone reading this and struggling with depression, it would be this: never underestimate the power of small steps. Sometimes, just waking up and facing the day is a victory. Celebrate every achievement, no matter how small, because it's through these tiny steps that the journey of recovery is built. And remember, there is always hope, even when everything feels lost. Keep moving forward, one day at a time. Looking back on everything I've been through with depression has taught me a lot about myself. Perhaps the greatest lesson is understanding that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, no matter how many times it happens. Depression forced me to confront my fears, my vulnerabilities, and to realize that, no matter how difficult the journey gets, I can find my way back, even on the darkest days. I've learned the importance of continuously seeking help, even when things seem fine. Therapy sessions, self-care routines, and moments of reflection are like regular maintenance that keep me strong and ready to face whatever comes next. Depression is an ongoing battle, but with the right tools and support, it doesn't have to define who I am or limit what I can achieve. Another invaluable lesson has been embracing moments of joy, no matter how small. I used to underestimate simple pleasures, waiting for grand achievements to feel happy. But now, I see that it's in those little victories, a meaningful conversation with a friend, a quiet afternoon playing guitar, or a peaceful walk outside, that I find strength and motivation to keep going. These moments of light are precious, and learning to appreciate them has been a significant step in my healing process. To anyone struggling with depression, my final words are ones of encouragement. I know how impossible it can feel to climb out of that deep pit, but believe me, there's always hope, always something to hold on to, even if it's just the will to try one more day. Don't be too hard on yourself. Celebrate your small victories, and never be ashamed to ask for help. This battle isn't one you have to face alone. Above all, remember this: your life has value, and you are far stronger than depression would have you believe. Keep seeking out your moments of joy. Keep moving forward, one step at a time. And never forget, you are not alone on this journey. With all my gratitude, Ethan.
Now that we've reached the end of Ethan Brooks' inspiring story, his words remind us of the strength that can be found even in the darkest moments. The journey with depression is full of challenges, but every small step toward healing is a meaningful victory. Ethan's story teaches us that seeking help isn't a sign of weakness. It's an act of courage. It's the beginning of a new chapter where hope and recovery become possible. If you or someone you know is going through something similar, remember, you're not alone. Sharing your experiences and hearing others' stories can be the first step toward healing. Leave a comment below and share your own journey, or reflect on what this story meant to you. Together, we can build a community of support and solidarity. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to hear more stories of hope and resilience. Let's continue spreading this message of strength and reminding everyone that it's possible to find light, even in the darkest times. Your story can be an inspiration too. Share it and become part of this network of support.